Okay, so yeah, we're going in reverse order. So I'm going to kick off talking about maps, essentially. I don't need to do an introduction because Alex has already done it. So what am I going to talk about? Super simple agenda. I'm going to talk about what our options are for creating maps in Power BI, and then I'm going to talk about what our options are when we can't do what we need to do with the out-of-the-box visuals in Power BI. And I've got about 3 more slides, and then the whole rest of the session is going to be super high-risk demo. See what happens. So these are the out-of-the-box visuals, or at least they were until the July release of Power BI. Actually, things have changed this month. If you open up Power BI today, you don't get all 5 visuals. If you want the map, build map, and shape map, the oldest 3 visuals for Power BI, obviously shape map famous for never ever having come out of preview 8.5 years ago. Then actually today, if you want these back in the brand new from scratch Power BI report, you have to go into Power BI desktop options, security settings, and tick a box to turn them back on again. Microsoft really don't want you to be using them. So I'm not going to talk about them either. I'm going to start off and focus on these 2. So Azure Maps and ArcGIS Maps. So it was 2 years ago that Mohammed Ali, who is what is he now? Probably the group program manager for all of the Power BI features over in Seattle, announced at SQLBits here in the UK, in London, that they were going to replace those first 3 visuals and build all of that functionality into Azure Maps. And I think they've pretty much done it for the first 2. I think it's some way off for shape map. The other reason they needed to do this is those first 3 maps were built on the really old Bing Maps API, which Microsoft deprecated some time ago, and they needed to move on to the much newer Azure Maps, which is actually built on top of a library, programming library, that was originally built by Mapbox, who are another specialist mapping company. Mapbox have since, well, it was open sourced by Mapbox, but they've since gone off and created a new library which you have to pay for. So Azure Maps is built on a fork of that older library, which in itself has continued to progress. And then the other visual is an interesting one, ArcGIS Maps. So even though it comes out of the box in Power BI, it's not actually created by Microsoft. It's built by a specialist mapping company called Esri, who are the market leader in GIS, geospatial solutions. It's also interesting because if you look under the covers in the code behind Power BI, in almost every way, it's just a custom visual that Microsoft have decided to, well, presumably there was a commercial arrangement between Esri and Microsoft, making an assumption there, but Microsoft have decided or agreed to include it as part of Power BI. But under the covers, it behaves as a custom visual. And that's it, that's the end of my slides. So let's get out of PowerPoint and let's have a little look at some of this in action. Right, so we're going to start off with Power BI Desktop. But obviously before we can start building some pretty maps, we need some data. And I'm not going to bore you by loading a load of data in. We're going to stick to the pretty stuff, but obviously it would help if we knew what sort of data we're looking at. So I've turned to one of my favorite data sets. It's open data from data.police.uk, and I've downloaded all of the crime data for all of the police forces in England for 1 month last year. I think it was March 2023. So let's have a look what that looks like. Is that big enough to see? Yeah. Let me walk over and I'll point. So in the data set, obviously we want to do some mapping, so it helps to have some geospatial type information. So we've got some coordinates. We've got longitudes and latitudes. Now, these aren't the exact coordinates where the crime occurred, because obviously you need to be a little bit careful when you're describing exactly where a crime has occurred, because you don't want to be potentially pointing out, domestic violence has occurred in this house. You need to be a little bit careful. So actually the coordinates relate to the center of the street where that crime occurred. So they're still quite specific, but they're not exact. That also means that you'll see that we've got multiple crimes will have occurred in the same location, even though they're different crimes. It just happens that they occurred on the same street. Then we've got this location field. It's not particularly useful to us for mapping. It says things like on or near a shopping centre, or on or near a train station or a car park, but it doesn't say which train station or which car park. So it's just a bit of extra context. So it doesn't help us for geolocation to work out where to put that crime on the map. This next column does, though. This LSOA code, it's called the Lower Super Output Area. Anybody familiar with these? You work in public sector? Please. Okay, great. You'll know this data well. So low super output areas are basically a statistical geography. It's a way of breaking up the country in equal segments based on roughly equivalent number of people that live in each of those areas. It's bigger than a few postcodes, but much, much smaller than like a local authority area, if that makes sense. So we'll see this used quite a bit. And then I've got the type of crime that occurred, the outcome of the police investigation. Investigation complete, no suspect identified for all of those. No comment? Okay. Won't hold you responsible. And then I've got two columns that I've added myself. I've got crime count, and because each row in our data set relates to one individual crime that has occurred, I'm super lazy, and I'm also super scared to write. Didn't you say something? Oh, okay, I thought you were going to interrupt. Right. Cool. I'm super lazy and too scared to write DAX on the fly in a demo, however simple it might be. So you're frowning at me. But if I put number 1 in all the columns, I don't need to write any DAX. I can just drag the crime count column in, and it'll aggregate up all of those crimes and say how many crimes there were in a particular location or of a particular type. And I don't need to do any DAX at all. I don't need to create my own measures. I just use an implicit measure. As bad practice as that might be, it's a lot safer in a demo. And then I've got this last column that I've also created, which might look a little bit strange thing to do at first glance, but you'll see in a minute why this is a really useful column. I've basically created a text field, which is the longitude and the latitude combined into a single text field. And what that actually gives us is a unique identifier that identifies the location where that crime was committed. So the middle of that street. Nothing else in our data gives us a unique way of saying this crime occurred here. Okay, that's my first table. The second table is a bit of a lookup table. Now, I'm going to go through all of these columns, don't panic. But the first one, so it's basically a geographic hierarchy. So if we want to start rolling up our crime data and understand how many crimes occurred in one of those low super output areas, or for a particular local authority, or for a particular police force, then we can start at that low super output area level and then work up through police force or local authority. I've got some other stuff in here. I've got region as well, just off the screen. And then these two tables are really super simply joined just on that low super output area field across the two. And that's it. That's all we're going to work with. So let's add our first map onto the report. And as I said, we're going to start with Azure Maps. And I'm going to start with the crime data. And we've got the longitude and latitude coordinates, so let's start there. Let's drag them on. And quite quickly, it looks like it's given us a little circle. There's lots overlapping. Looks like we've got a circle representing each of those locations where the crime was committed. However, we need to be really careful, because if you can just see up here in the top right-hand corner, we've got this little eye symbol. And the reason we've got that is because almost all visuals in Power BI are limited to 30,000 rows of data. But if you have a look at our crime data, we've got 518,000 rows of data. So if I click on the eye, what it's actually doing is saying it's only showing the significant data points. So how is it deciding which ones are significant? Well, actually it tells us. It says it's picking the ones that aren't close to the other ones that aren't hidden by other neighboring points, which would be fine. But if we're trying to understand where our clusters of crime is by where all the points are close together, the map's actually taken those ones that would be close together away, and it's just spreading them across the whole of the country. So we get an idea of the extent of crime, but not where the crime's clustered. So we need some strategies to be able to deal with this. And map visuals, no different to any other visual. A lot of the strategies that we employ generally for dealing with large amounts of data apply to map visuals. So of course, the first thing we can do is we can filter it. So if I drag on a slicer, I can try and have a look at particular parts of the country at a time. It's unlikely that you're going to be able to want to go all the way down to street level from the whole country at a time. So this is a reasonable strategy. So let's stick with London for a minute. I would do the Northwest, but the Northwest is quite a long region that goes all the way up above the Lake District and down through Manchester. London fits on the screen a bit nicer. So it looks like it's done a pretty good job here. This is roughly the outside of London, but we've still got a little eye symbol here. So what's going on? Let's drag on a quick card. And let me just, doesn't really matter what field at this point. Oops. Let's drag it into here and do a quick count. We've still got 85,000 rows of data. So I'm still losing 55,000 rows. So we're not there yet. But interestingly, remember that lat-lot combine field that I created that represented a distinct location? Well, if we have a look at how many of those there are, there's actually just over 30,000. So if I drag that lang-lot, must name it something I can actually say next time, that combined field into the location field, the map errors, but don't worry. What we're going to do is we're going to choose to average the latitudes and longitudes. But if you average a number where every number is the same, you're going to just have that number. So we're not actually creating an average of the latitudes and longitudes at this point. We're just making sure that we only put in a row for each of the locations. So now we're displaying 30,000 locations, not 30,000 crimes. And interestingly, you'll notice that it started plotting here and it's gone across and we've hit 30,000 rows here and we've got this kind of straight line. And that's our remaining few hundred rows, 660 rows that we couldn't plot. But at the moment, I'm happier that I've only lost 660 rows and not 55,000 rows. What I can do to improve things a bit is drag in the crime count field into size. And then actually the map uses a slightly different algorithm. It goes back to doing that representative sample, but we've got a representative sample only filtering out 660 rows, not 30-odd thousand. And we get bigger circles depending on how many crimes occurred at that location. So it's better, but it's a bit of a mess, isn't it? I mean, I could do something with this. I could make the circles smaller and go bigger to give us a bit of an idea, but it's always going to be massively overlapping at this amount of detail. It's not really telling me yet, other than as if, unless I zoom right into the detail, where the crimes are occurring, I can't tell yet from this which areas of London are experiencing the most amount of crime. Question? Patience. I'm getting there. Getting there. Getting there. So, you're absolutely right. We need to have a look at other ways of visualizing this kind of data. And we've got a few. So 3D is one of them. And I'll get to that in a minute because it will quite often crash. And I'll crash last, not first. So one of the things that we can do is use clustering. So where we've got lots of points in the same place, we can ask the map to reduce those down and show us a circle, but we have to tweak the settings a little bit because the defaults aren't really usable. If we increase the size of the circles, what we now get instead is a circle with how many points there are underneath. And as I zoom in, these will expand out and we get eventually all the way down to the individual locations. But I'm not a big fan of this. It doesn't really work for this kind of data because if I zoom back out to London level, I've got a circle here with 3,800 points underneath, and I've got a circle here with 2 points underneath, and I haven't really got any way of distinguishing them. They're all the same color, they're all the same size. It might be fine if you wanted to know how many shops there were, but when you're dealing with this amount of information, it doesn't really work. So let's turn our circles off for a minute. And our other option is we could try a heat map. And again, we need to tweak the settings slightly. So let's change the radius to 5 and maybe go with, let's go from blue to yellow to red, maybe. And now we kind of get, as we zoom in, we get these areas of intensity, kind of showing that there's a bit of a hotspot here in the Westminster Houses of Parliament. Of a little bit of a hotspot of crime. So this is quite a good technique. Now, I'll be brave and turn on the 3D columns for you. If this crashes my report, I will not be impressed. Yeah, so the other thing we can do, there we go, is use the 3D point, because then we do get some of, oh, I've clicked. That was dangerous. Oh, my mouse has gone really slow. Right, there we are, we're back. I'm not going to try and move that. But we do get these spikes, where these big peaks of crime are. Yeah, there you go. But it's still not showing me which areas of London are experiencing, those the amount of crime is what I'm trying to say. Also, it's not really telling me which of these different areas of London we're looking at. Let me turn the heat map back on a second, because I think it works a little bit better with the heat map than it does the charts. If we want to understand how London breaks down into the different London boroughs, what we can do is we can add on that one, a GeoJSON file, which contains the London Borough bindings. And we've got some new functionality to show this month. Up until July release of Power BI, these London Borough boundaries, oops, that's not the map's fault, that's my fault on the slopey pedestal. These polygons that are now drawing underneath, we had the choice of colouring them blue or blue. But in this month, we've got some formatting options, so I can actually now change to say that I don't want big blue backgrounds. I can't change the fill to be transparent so I can see the streets particularly clearly underneath yet, but it's a big improvement, especially if you were trying to plot out things like, I don't know, oil and gas fields on the blue sea. There was no way you could make them easily show up before, whereas now we get some formatting options. Yeah. Don't ask me. Don't ask me. I've been lobbying for just these settings for months. I'm just happy to have this much. So anyway, what I actually want to be able to do, though, is not have a heat map with these polygons behind. What I actually want to be able to do is have the London boroughs shaded by how much crime there is in each London borough. But I can't do that with Azure Maps. So our other options, well, our other options are the ArcGIS visual, if we're working with the out-of-the-box visuals. Now, this is going to be a bit interesting because ArcGIS visual has also been updated this month. It's got a nice new shiny looking set of buttons to press instead of the old green ones. But perhaps more interesting is the fact that Esri have updated the licensing model that sits behind all of ArcGIS. And unfortunately, the license that I was previously using that allowed me to go in and use my polygons that I've got in my ArcGIS account is no longer high enough to be able to use it in Power BI. And I can't even log in, unfortunately, with another account. It's just erroring for some reason. So I can't get at my ArcGIS data at all. I don't know whether that's because I need £1,000 a year ArcGIS creator license now to be able to create maps in Power BI using the ArcGIS license, or whether there's just something gone wrong with my account. I think it's the fact I need a more expensive license. Sorry, you had the same problem. It did work 2 weeks ago, and then the new licensing model came out and it hasn't worked since. Now I can continue as a guest, and actually it does let us use the local authority boundaries for the UK and even shade them, although we can't choose our own colour scheme. We have to pick from one of the built-in ones. But unfortunately, it's not going to help us here either, because the boundaries that are built in to the ArcGIS visual are based on the local authority boundaries from 2011, I think, or 2013, something like that. And I've got more up-to-date set of boundaries from 2022, and they don't match. The codes are different, and in some cases the names are different where different local authorities have merged. So we can't use the ArcGIS map either. So not into those visuals, no. No. And of course, it's not just our own custom boundaries that we might want to put on a map and color them to create what's called a choropleth map. We might not want to use Azure Maps or Esri's map backgrounds. We might work for a public sector organisation in the UK and want to use Ordnance Survey mapping because we get it for free and it goes all the way down to super detailed road infrastructure level. We might work for utility company or an energy company, and we might want to map our gas pipelines or water pipes, and then shade different segments of them based on how leaky they are, and how they need some attention. Or it might be you might work for a train operator, and you want a map of your railway network, plotting on perhaps the locations of your trains, or KPIs on all of your stations. How busy is this station at this time of the day? We might want to cluster in a different way. We might want to roll up those crimes into the hexagon system that Anthony was talking about on LinkedIn this morning. We might just want to put pictures on the map. Might work for a supermarket, and I want to know where all my competitors are by plotting their logos around me. Or, as I say, might work for a delivery company or a shipping company, and I want to know, where all of my delivery vans are and what routes they're currently driving on. These are all use cases that we can't currently do with the Azure Maps or Esri Map visuals in Power BI. But the good news is in Power BI, obviously this happens a bit, we have some kind of visualization that we want to add to our report that isn't supported out of the box. We have this thing called custom visuals. And maps are no exception. I think I counted 20 custom visuals for maps available now. Some in the custom visuals marketplace and app source, and some just independently provided. So it's quite a good choice. Now, I think I was probably one of the first to provide a map custom visual, which is now 8 years ago. I released the first version of a visual called Icon Map, which kind of grew out of lots of different customer requirements that I had in my consultancy job back then. And I'd ended up building bespoke map visuals for a number of different companies. And then it made sense to pull all of those different requirements and build a single visual that was able to service lots of different requirements going forwards. And I ended up releasing that publicly on AppSource. And over the last 6 or 7 years, it's got to the point that it's now used as much as those out-of-the-box map visuals. But unfortunately, when you're trying to support a visual that's used by millions of people on top of your day job, it's all become somewhat unsustainable. I can't go home after a day's work and then sit down and answer 20 support requests. And the support request is never your map's broken. The support request is, it's not doing this, what am I doing wrong? And you open up a Power BI report that they sent you, and it's a whole new data model required. It's never the visual, it's always the data model and the DAX. So these are never quick things to fix. So it all became unsustainable, and I kind of made the choice of, do I just abandon it? And instead, what I've actually decided to do is turn it into the day job. So I've kind of retired the old icon map. I haven't taken it away, it's still there. People are still using it, but instead there's no support for that old visual. And instead, I've released a new visual called Icon Map Pro, which is a chargeable visual, but obviously by being a chargeable visual, turning it into a commercial product, it means I can build a support team around it, people to answer all of these questions. And of course, instead of being distracted by answering all the support requests, I can work on building all of the new features that everybody's been asking for the last 6 or 7 years, and I haven't had time to do because I'm just answering all the questions that have been coming in. So in April this year, I launched a new company called Tekantis with another work colleague, left our consultancy jobs and spent 3 months building brand new visual, which we launched 6 weeks ago. I think it landed in AppSource, and it's growing rapidly. We're absolutely being flooded with new feature requests on a daily basis, of which we're doing our best to incorporate as many as we can, as quickly as we can. So let me give you a quick demo of the new visual. So stay in the data set. So you get the visual in the same way as you do every other custom visual. You can head to App Source. And if you go to Maps in App Source, you'll see there it is, Icon Map Pro. But I've already added it to the report, so we won't do that. Now, I haven't got a license for it on this account. So, but if you want to try out the functionality and see what it can do, you just hit the close, and now you get full use of the visual to try all of the different things that it can do. So, what were we trying to do? We were trying to create a local authority map. So, oops, what have I clicked? We've got our local authority codes in here. So I'm just going to drag that into the ID field. And I'm going to drag, actually, before we do that, let's just talk a bit about the actual map. Now, taken for granted, right? This background map. In the old visual, I relied on OpenStreetMap and OpenStreetMap servers, but actually they're only really supposed to be used for like test purposes. You're not supposed to use their servers for a big commercial application. So people, you know, airlines, whoever it is going off and using the old icon map to track all of their planes in flight, probably shouldn't be using OpenStreetMap's free service. In fact, they're quite explicit. You shouldn't be using their free service. So the old icon map visual allowed you to put in a Mapbox API key and use Mapbox as background maps. But as I'm rapidly discovering, nobody ever did that. And they just used the free test mapping. But obviously, me building a new product, I couldn't release a product using someone's free services. So first thing we've done is we've built our own background mapping service, similar to Azure Maps or Esri's, for the whole world, all the way down to street level, house, building level, built on OpenStreetMap data, which is, you know, can be used for any purposes, including commercial purposes, but it's hosted on our own set of servers. Now, obviously, if you're using Azure Maps in Power BI, Microsoft are using Azure Map services, and then some of your Power BI monthly fee that you pay is cross-charged internally in Microsoft between the two different teams. Unfortunately, I don't get Azure Maps for free and can't do internal cross-charging to Microsoft. So hence, some of that charge for the visual goes into being able to provide the background mapping service, which obviously has a cost to being able to provide that service and keeping it up to date and hosting it. But you don't have to use ours. We've also got built-in support for Azure Maps if you want to use Azure Maps, ArcGIS Maps if you want to use theirs, but also Mapbox, Google Maps if you want really detailed satellite imagery of somewhere, you can put in your Google Maps API key and use that. And some other services, including built-in support for Ordnance Survey, or your company's own internal map server if you have one. So loads of different options. I thought it was worth mentioning. And then the other thing worth mentioning, the other bit of a blocker that we've been trying to work around in the other visual the whole time, is that 30,000 row limit. So if I just drag on latitude and longitude and crime count in my circle size box, but what have I got in there? Let's take off that and put in that lot combined field. Now you'll notice we've got that same vertical line here, right? Where we've hit our 30,000 rows. Exactly the same as we had in Azure Maps, except in here, how many did we need? Well, 60,000 would cover it, wouldn't it? There we go, fixed. Maximum is 180,000 in this version. In the next version, I'm trying to get, well, we'll see how high it will go. I'm working on 500,000 at the minute. I'm going to try 1 million rows of data. That's the plan. We'll see. There's that upper limit that Microsoft has set according to how much memory it takes up internally inside the visual. So I think what I'm working on at the moment, the map's capable of rendering a lot more, but we're limited by the Power BI infrastructure behind the scenes. Anyway, we don't want to do circles. We've done enough with circles. So let's turn those off again. How am I doing for time? Running out, but that's okay. We'll get there. Instead of doing circles, bring in our local authority code. Go into the formatting options. We don't want to do circles. Instead, we're going to bring in those shapes, but we're not just going to do London. Don't film me now. Where's that gone? It's never happened before. Let's start again. Always in the demo. Let's try again. Local authority code. I probably dragged something in the wrong place. Okay, maybe it was that. Shouldn't have mattered. But anyway, let's try it again. Not working. It should be putting a button on there. What version of a visual are we using? 1.3. It's the same version as I've been using for the last few weeks, doing exactly this. Okay, give it one more go, and then we'll do it a different way. Oh, I'm just being thick. I don't know what I'm doing there. But anyway, right. Clearly under pressure in the demo. Right, so we've turned on shapes. We don't want to be referencing an external file. We want to upload our file. So now, I'm not quite sure what I was doing a minute ago. Unfortunately, unlike the Azure Maps, where we just click an upload file button in there, Microsoft don't give me the option to be able to provide that in the UI. So instead, what I have to do is click a button over in the formatting settings, and it makes the blue button appear there. And then I just get the option to upload the file. So here are my local authority districts file. Now, if you use the old icon map, this was a real nightmare to do. You had to go off to Office for National Statistics GeoPortal, download your file in Esri Shape Map, then you had to upload it into a third-party tool like QGIS or MapShaper. You had to reduce the complexity down, otherwise it would break the visual. And you also had to change the projection from British National Grid coordinates to longitudes and latitudes. Obviously, it's quite complicated, especially the first time you do it. Whereas that's all handled for us behind the scenes inside the visual now. So here's our local authority areas. So we've got all of our custom polygons based on that file downloaded. Now, some are blue and some are grey. The reason for that is the ones that are blue have been matched to our crime data for England. And then the other ones that we've still got polygons for, but it hasn't found related data because I've only got England data, not Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland data. They're in grey. So we've got some options here. We can format them. So for these unmatched ones, we can change the colors. We can change the transparency of the fill and the border. Or we can just choose to remove them because we haven't got data for them. So let's do that for now. And then to create that choropleth map I was talking about, let's change the outline color to black. And then I can just use bog standard Power BI conditional formatting and say, let's base it on the number of crimes, some of that crime count field that we've got in our data. And here's our super simple choropleth map. Everything's interactive. So if I filter just to London, we get one for London. If I want one for the Northwest, obviously we can do it for the Northwest. But let's get more detailed. So we've got those lower super output areas in our data as well. So let's say I want 2 drill down levels. We'll drag in that lower super output area field as well. And then I can, whoops, not that one. Hopefully I've not messed that up. I can also bring in the lower super output areas. And this is quite a big file, actually. Behind the scenes, it's busy converting and simplifying it all. I should be able to click in here and drill down and see those lower super output areas here in Westminster. And yes, lo and behold, right over the Houses of Parliament, we do have that concentration of crime. So there we go. I messed it up at the start. I think I was clicking something without looking at the screen to see what I was actually clicking, but super simple way of creating a choropleth map. Now I'm nearly out of time. I think I've got 5 minutes because we started 5 minutes late. So I just want to show you a few other options without me having to build it all from scratch. So where should we start? I can get rid of Teams thing that's just popped up on my screen. So lines. One of the most obvious things we want to draw on a map is a line between 2 points. So here we're showing, well, in my data set, I've got all of the different routes that every airline in the world flies. So here we're looking at British Airways, but I can just pick any other airline at random, Malta, and it will show the different routes that that particular airline flies. So when we draw lines on the map, we can either draw them as straight lines, we can draw them as curved lines, or we can make our line follow the shortest route around the curvature of the Earth. And then from a formatting point of view, using Power BI's conditional formatting, we can change the color, we can change the width, we can change the transparency, we can change the pattern of the line, you know, whether it's a dash pattern. And as of this last release, we can also animate that dash pattern so you can see the lines moving and draw arrows on them and put text on them. So loads of different options for lines. Right, let's stick with aviation for a moment. Let me move my Teams thing. So I talked about wanting to draw pictures on the map. So in my attic at home, I've got a little antenna that's listening to all of the aircraft transponders as the planes are flying around in the airspace above my house. And I'm feeding that data into Microsoft Fabric, it's Fabric user group as well, right? Using Microsoft real-time intelligence workload inside of Fabric. And then every 5 seconds, I'm querying that data into my Power BI report. So these are all of the planes that are above my house, back down south right now. And if a plane transponder shows it's moved, you'll see those planes moving around. So we can plot images on the map. We can show different images, so you can see there's different types of pictures of plane according to the plane type. We can change the size, and we can rotate them around 360 degrees, so that if it is representing a vehicle, we can show it in the direction of travel. And then the other thing I talked about is clustering data. So as I've been collecting all of this aircraft data for the last few months, it's quite interesting to try and understand which bits of the airspace above me are noisy. If you wanted to buy a new house, there's lots of airports around me. There's Farnborough Airport, there's Gatwick, there's Heathrow, Southampton. So there's lots of different flight paths. So every single time an aircraft has flown into one of these hexagons, we increase the intensity of the color. So here you can see these lines coming in over Windsor, Legoland, I think right under there, into Gatwick, Heathrow Airport, which is too low for me to pick up from the aerial in my antenna. But basically, this is Uber's H3 hexagon system, where they've divided the whole planet up into different hexagons at different sizes for different resolutions, which the map can either draw. You can either give it a longitude and latitude and tell it what resolution you want, and it will generate the hexagons for you. Or if you've already got like billions or millions of rows of data pre-processed and you've got the IDs of the hexagons, you can just pass those in and it will natively understand them and draw the hexagons for you without you having to work out all of the longitude and latitude points to draw them. And in this visual, you can see I'm actually representing 360 million rows of data in these hexagons at the moment. So you can, really represent a huge amount of data in these. And actually, I've got a customer using this on a global scale for showing the signal strength all around the world of Starlink internet satellites. Right, I'll just show a couple more before I get kicked off. Yeah, let's do this one, and let's do this one. Right, when I was showing those choropleth maps before, obviously we were only showing the choropleths at a time, and we kicked away the circles. But quite often you want to be able to show objects of different types at the same time. So here we're looking at Greater Manchester. Thought I'd make it relevant. I've got data for the whole country, but I pre-filtered it. And here we're showing deprivation. Currently income deprivation, but I can change that. We could change it to, I don't know, employment or health or crime or overall deprivation, and it will change the colours in the background. And then overlaid in the red circles, I'm currently showing hospitals, but equally we could change that to be doctors' GPs. So if you want to plan where to create a new doctor's surgery, for example, it'd be interesting to understand where the need is for those different services. Or if you're a pharmaceutical company and you wanted to understand vaccination rates around different GP surgeries, you want the GP surgeries on, and then how many people are vaccinated in the colours around it. What was the other one I was going to show? Yeah, this one. So when I was creating these polygons before, I was uploading them as static files, which is fine if you just want a static set of polygons. But as I mentioned before, that these boundaries change over time. So back in 2013, the boundaries won't have been what they are today. In fact, we've had multiple sets, even we've got two new sets since 2022. Boundary changes impact the police as well. It's quite a common thing that we need to deal with. So if you've got data changing over time, geospatial data is no different. And the easiest way to deal with that is to store all of these boundaries in your database. Also helpful if you're using data sources like Postgres or Snowflake that have geospatial data as natively supported. You can just surface that data. But as well as dealing with it over time, the other advantage is you can store huge amounts of geospatial data. So to give you a bit of an example, if I drill through into wherever I picked, Islington, I think. In this map, anything in color has come out of my SQL Server database. It's not part of the background map. It's actually in my Power BI dataset now. So advantage of that is, as I mouse over it, I can pull out any metadata in a report page tooltip related to that particular object. So I can see this is Grafton Primary School, for example. But it also means I can join it to other data in my Power BI dataset. So I've also got 30 years worth of house price data in here, which is many hundreds of millions of rows of data. So every single time a house in the UK has been sold in the last 30 years, it's in this dataset. But I've joined that at a property level to the data in the map. So I can use, just like a lasso, and highlight a specific set of houses on the map, and then it will update the rest of the charts on the report to show the sales history for those actual individual houses that I've selected. So it's a way of handling, huge amounts of geospatial information and then joining it back to the rest of your data estate. Right. Two more very quickly. I think it would just be worth showing these, and then I'll stop for breath. Let's do those two. So talking about interacting with the rest of the report, quite like this one. This is a nice bit of open data from Canada. This is the water mains network of a city of Victoria in Canada. And we can use conditional formatting to say, color my water mains based on who's responsible for them, priority for replacement, their I don't know, current condition. But we can also do things like cross-highlight the other way and say, show me all of the pipes that are used for residential properties in Victoria City, made of cast iron, that are, I don't know, let's do over 100 years old. And then it's just highlighting those individual segments of pipe, and I can mouse over them as well with my tooltips, and I can do it without zooming in under pressure with minutes over time. Oh, I don't know, you get the idea, but you could bring up their, I'm on a slope here, their inspection and maintenance logs, that kind of thing, for that individual segment of pipeline. And then finally, just to finish, everything I've shown so far has been real latitude and longitude coordinates in the big wide world. But all we're doing is plotting points or lines on a picture. Whether that picture happens to be pictures of the Earth, it could also be pictures indoors. So there's nothing to stop us using all of those same different map objects, or most of them at least, and plotting them indoors. So this is plotting parts as they move around indoors in the factory, or we can, maybe use the heat map to show, particular parts of the factory that are particularly busy and likely to have accidents, I don't know, whatever it is. But you get the idea, and all interactive and cross-filtered with the other visuals on the report. Right. maybe it was. So yeah, I'll stop there. I'm over time. Ton of different use cases that now can be surfaced in Power BI, and hopefully joining data in your geospatial data with the rest of your data platform data. Yeah, well, digital twins is a great use case for trying to do this kind of thing. I've worked on quite a few in the past. Things like carbon capture projects where you want to map pipelines and understand, what's happening in different parts of your digital twin. It could be anything. You can overlay objects on top of the map as well. Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, it's a great use case for more advanced mapping. Really badly. Copilot at the moment won't create you a map in Power BI. It also doesn't yet work with custom visuals, so you're reliant on configuring it yourself. Our greater plans are, as well as building the visualization layer, is to build a custom Fabric workload that handles a lot of that data preparation for you. And we want to incorporate that with maybe Copilot if we can access it through Microsoft APIs, but use that to help prepare the data, get it in the right shape, and then ideally generate your template Power BI report, because we obviously understand what all the properties need to be able to do that, especially now as they've opened up the underlying structure of a Power BI report file. It allows us to do that in a supported way going forwards. Yeah.